G'day ladies and gentlemen, Scotty D49 here with you once again for another installment in our Warhammer 40k competitive focus playlist here on YouTube. Now, in today's video, we are going to be digging into the third and final part of our look at the Arks of Omen GT mission pack. And that is what we're directly looking at today. We're going to look at the GT mission pack itself, looking at its detachment changes for how you're going to be constructing your army list, the secondary changes, as well as the changes in the mission as well. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everyone that's been subscribing over here on YouTube as of late, leaving comments, liking videos. I really do appreciate it. And if you do enjoy this style of more competitive style content, please let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and, you know, make sure that I'm creating content that you guys are enjoying consuming. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into it. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, so as I said, we're going to be jumping into the GT mission pack today for the Arks of Omen season for the first half of 2023. And in this video, we're going to be specifically looking at the army construction and pre-game changes. We're going to look at the secondary changes depending on your faction. And we're going to be looking at the changes to the Strike Force missions, which are the ones that you use at 2,000 points for competitive play. So to start off with, we're going to jump straight into army construction and pre-game. And so first, we're going to jump straight to this guy. We're going to jump straight into talking about the Arks of Omen detachment. So first up, we're going to look at the Arks of Omen detachment. Now, firstly, you don't use any detachments for the core rulebook in Arks of Omen. You now use the detachment that is on screen, and it is in the GT pack. It costs 0 command points, and it has a compulsory slots of 1 HQ and any 3 of the following slots, either troops, elites, fast attack, heavy support, or Lords of War. Now, if you are choosing to run an Imperial Knight or a Chaos Knight army, then you don't actually need to take that compulsory HQ slot. It does have that caveat on the document there as well. Then you can take any of the following in any order that you want. These are your additional slots, which you can take up to 9 troops, up to 3 of each for HQ, elite, fast attack, heavy support, Lords of War, and fortifications. You also get an additional 3 slots for any elite character units. So it means if they're in your elite slot, stuff like apothecaries, chapter ancients, judiciars, things like that from Space Marines, you can actually take them and not take up valuable elite slots for things like Blade Guard veterans, for example. You can take 0 to 2 flyers, and you can take 1 dedicated transport for each infantry keyword in your army. Now, it has also got the standard restriction that you cannot build your faction army list using the Imperium, Chaos, Aeldari, or Tyrannid keywords, and it can also not contain any understrength units. Now, we're going to jump into command points, which means we're going to jump back up a little bit here, team. And so, as you can see, we do start off with 6 command points still, but that is for both your incursion level games and your strike force level games. So if you're still playing 1,000-point competitive stuff, you get 6. You're playing at 2,000 points, you still get 6 as well. Now, the core requisition stratagems, you still need to pay that 1 CP if you want to take that first warlord trait, and if you want to pay another CP to take that first relic. But there is also a new one, which is called Heroic Support. Now again, this one is also 1 CP, but this allows you to take 2 of a particular HQ choice if your army has got a detachment ability that restricts you from being able to take an additional one of those HQs. For example, Space Marines cannot take more than 1 captain in a detachment. Spending a command point will allow you to take 2 captains, for example. However, this stratagem does specifically exclude the Gene Sect detachment ability for Gene Stealer cults. So Gene Stealer cult players, unfortunately, do miss out on this one, but you've got a lot of characters to pick from in your army anyway. Now, the only other type of detachment that you're actually able to take is what's called an allied detachment, which can either be a patrol, a super heavy auxiliary, or an auxiliary support detachment from the core rulebook. Now, the following, as you can see on screen, we've got the Battle Brothers rules there. The following rules in the Battle Brothers section of the pack actually determines what you can actually take as a allied detachment. So first off, by using the Arks of Omen detachment and you're taking an Imperium army, so anything that's got the Imperium keyword but not using that keyword to build your list, keep that in mind. then you can take one of the following: an Agents of the Imperium Patrol or Auxiliary Support Detachment, a single free blade Knight of the Imperial Knight Codex, so it has to be a free blade, it can't be from a particular house, as a super heavy auxiliary detachment, or a Leagues of Votann patrol detachment. Now, a lot of people were surprised that the Imperium gets an allied patrol detachment of Leagues of Votann. Really surprising there. Let me know what you guys think of that in the comments below. The next one is if you're taking, obviously everyone's going to be using the Arks of Omen detachment, but if you're using Drukhari or Asuryani for the detachment, then you can actually take a Harlequins patrol detachment as your allied detachment as well. If you're playing Ashramillitarum, then you can include an Ashramillitarum patrol detachment that only contains Militarum Tempestus keyword units. So if you're not wanting to put in Militarum Tempestus into your core army, then you can actually put them into a patrol outside of the core army, and they will still get their detachment bonuses by being in a separate detachment and not mess with the detachment bonuses of your Arks of Omen detachment. If you're playing Genestealer Cult, you can include a Brood Brothers Patrol Auxiliary Support or Super Heavy Auxiliary Support detachment as an allied detachment as well. Now, if you're running Chaos, just basic core keyword Chaos as your detachment, much like the Imperium, then you can include one Dreadblade Chaos Knight in a Super Heavy Auxiliary detachment, meaning that you can't take, again, a particular house from the Chaos Knights Codex. It has to be their version of Free Blades, which is Dreadblades. Now, if you're running one of the following factions, whether it's World Eaters, Thousand Suns, Death Guard, or Traitoris Astartes with the Emperor's Children Legion trait, then you can actually include a Legionis Demonica patrol detachment solely made up of Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, or Slaanesh demons, respectively. So if you're taking World Eaters, you can take Khorne, Thousand Suns, Tzeentch, Death Guard, Nurgle, Emperor's Children, Slaanesh. That's how it breaks down. However, if you're taking a Traitoris Astartes detachment that uses a legion other than Emperor's Children, then you can just take a generic Legionis Demonica patrol detachment with any Chaos God keyworded units in there. You don't have to be allied with a specific Chaos God under that. And if you are using the Arks of Omen detachment and you use a Legionis Demonica detachment with the Disciples of Be'lakor Army of Renown, then you can take a Traitoris Astartes detachment and a House Korvax Chaos Knight Super Heavy Auxiliary detachment, with this option being the only one that is exempt from being able to take a single allied detachment. So you can take multiple allied detachments. So this is where we're actually going to jump to the FAQ that actually dropped last night whilst I was asleep and everyone's having a bit of an uproar over it. There's been a bit of huff and puff about Supreme Commanders. Now, they've added in some additional bullet points and some additional rules for using the Supreme Commanders, and we've also got an update on Drukhari as well in terms of some of their rules. So we'll talk about these as well, and we'll include them here. So you can only include one Supreme Commander in your Arks of Omen detachment. You can include Abaddon the Despoiler in a Legion detachment, even if it's not a Black Legion detachment. Very similar for the Silent King. You can include the Silent King in a Necron detachment, even if it's not the Cesra Khan Dynasty. Now, you can include Commander Shadow Sun in a Sept detachment for the Arks of Omen detachment, even if it is not a Tau Sept detachment. By doing so, you don't prevent any of your other units in that detachment gaining their detachment rules. Note that Commander Shadow Sun will only gain the Sept Tenant if every Sept unit in the army is the Tau Sept keyword. So again, very similar to like you're running Black Legion and such as well. I believe that would be how it works, but it hasn't specified there. So I guess that's the only one where it restricts it to Shadow Sun only gaining the Sept Tenant if the entire army has the Sept, the Tau Sept. You can include Belisarius Call in a Forge World detachment, even if it's not a Mars detachment. Doing so doesn't prevent other units from gaining their detachment rules, and Call only gains a Dogma if the Forge World is Forge World Mars. You can include an Adeptus Astartes Primarch unit in a chapter detachment, even if it does not share the same chapter. Doesn't prevent the units in it from gaining their detachment abilities, but only if the chapter keyword is the same as the Primarchs will the Primarch gain that ability. So we see the Silent King and Abaddon the Despoiler exempt from those. Really interestingly, But there's a few other Supreme Commanders around, like Morven Val, for example, that hasn't gotten anything said in this. And so there's a few others. Then we come to the Drukhari in terms of Battle Brothers. So they've added this additional Battle Brothers for them. If your Arks of Omen detachment is a Drukhari Cabal, Witch Cult, or Homunculus Covenant detachment, you can include one Drukhari Patrol detachment of a different type as an allied detachment. For example, if your Arks of Omen detachment is Cabal, you can select a Witch or Cult or Homunculus Covenants detachment as your allied detachment. All Cabal units in a Cabal detachment gain the Drukhari Obsession, or Witch Cult units gain a Drukhari Obsession if they're in a Witch Cult detachment, and same for Homunculus Covenants. So it means that a couple more things are back in order for them. I think potentially Real Space Raiders might be on the table. If you're a Drukhari player, let me know in the comments if I'm reading that correctly. So really, there's not a lot of change here, but I have seen other content creators out there saying, oh, Abaddon's been taken out, and they've just immediately FAQ'd it back. So they've allowed Supreme Commanders to still kind of do their thing in other factions. However, I personally would have liked to have seen Supreme Commanders restricted a bit more in that sense. They were doing a lot last season, and so because they've given us a lot more freedom in the detachment and how you can build your lists now, yes, you're not paying the CP for different detachments. You've only got the one detachment. You can choose how you build it. I think restricting Supreme Commanders with a little bit of give and take there, they've given us more freedom in the detachments, taken away some freedom in terms of characters and Supreme Commanders, I think was perfectly fine. Now that we've covered that, we're actually going to jump into actually how you set up for your missions and how things go. So for Arks of Omen, they specifically state on the next page that if you're wanting to place units in strategic reserves, you no longer actually need to pay command points to do so. Now, of course, that command point spend was always determined on the power level you were taking. So if you were taking above 9 power level, it would cost you 2 CP. So there are the normal restrictions still that you can't have more than half your units and more than half your power level in strategic reserve, so bear that in mind. But I think we'll see a bit more play in terms of how strategic reserves are used by players, maybe with smaller units, outflanking to do retrieve battlefield data, as it's now called. A few other things as well. I think we'll see some effects from this as well. Now, the other change is that any dedicated transports in your army must have a specific unit deployed in them when they are declared during the declare reserves and transport step. Otherwise, they actually count as being destroyed and can't be set up. So really now, if you're taking dedicated transports, you've got to actually have units in them. Otherwise, they're just going to count as being destroyed, and that's wasted points. Now, the other change that we see to strategic reserves, and this is all strategic reserves as well, any reinforcement units that arrive on the battlefield as well, they can never arrive during the first battle round, which means that you're limited to only bringing them on during the second and third battle rounds. Otherwise, if they aren't deployed, they count as being destroyed. And that is also something to bear in mind. Now, when we come to players conceding or ending the battle early, they've changed it to where if both players choose to end the game early, then you can agree upon a point in time at the end and calculate your scores at that point. They haven't specified whether that counts as the last battle round or not, but generally, because it's not the final battle round, it's not the 5th battle round, then you don't get those bonuses if you're going second. You don't score at the end of your turn, for example. You don't get anything that scores at the end of the turn or counts as scoring at the end of the game, I should say. Now, if only one player wants to end the game early, that player just concedes and the other player is the victor. So what that means is the player that concedes would get no points, as far as I'm aware, because they remove the models off the battlefield. And then your opponent is the victor. They get to score points out. I think we're going to see maybe the ITC come out with a bit of an FAQ around that, quite possibly. That pretty much covers all the changes when it comes to army construction and the pre-game process. I didn't really see anything too major from that either. So, again, pretty straightforward. Just some small tweaks from where Nephilim's at. So that about covers it for all the pre-game and army construction changes in Arks of Omen. I think most of it's really cool, and I like that the detachment change reminds me of Combined Arms detachments back in 6th. and a whole bunch of other things as well. And so from here, we're actually going to jump into starting to look at the secondaries and what has changed for them, as well as starting off with the core secondaries that everyone gets access to. Now, again, everyone actually gets to start off with the same 3 secondaries that are core secondaries. Now, whilst we're going through these, we're going to start off by looking at the core, then we'll go into Imperium, followed by Chaos, finishing up with Xenos. So the first up for the core secondaries, we've seen a change to Assassination. So if a character's killed as a result of attacks from a troop, armiger, or war dog unit, you now gain 1 command point at the end of the battle round. So that is the progressive component of that. I like that change. It means there's a bit more incentive to sticking with this core secondary objective. Bring it down has not changed since Nephilim. Next up, we come in to grind them down, and once again, if one or more enemy units were killed as a result of attacks from a troop, armiger, or war dog unit, you now, again, gain 1 command point at the end of the battle round for doing so. And again, this one still stays the same, where you score 3 victory points if more enemy units than friendly units were destroyed during the battle round. So again, there's that incentive to run it as is, and you're able to get that command point if you're able to kill at least 1 unit from a troop or armiger or war dog unit, which is really nice. When it comes to no prisoners has not changed. It's still the same as it was in Nephilim. So next we come to Warpcraft. Now, the first one that has changed is Warp Ritual. This one's only very minor. They've increased the warp charge from 3 to 4 for the psychic action. I'll also say that Abhor the Witch has not changed at all. It's still the way it is. And then we come to Psychic Interrogation. Now, Psychic Interrogation has also had a minor change where the warp charge has increased from 4 to 5 to perform the psychic action. So these were quite popular to take because of how low they were to cast. So Warp Ritual was a 3, Psychic Interrogation was a 4. Now, they're a little bit harder on 2d6. Not that you won't often not get them off, but there will be times where you'll just have a bad roll and unfortunately won't be able to cast them as well. Then next up, we go to Battlefield Supremacy, and we have a look at behind enemy lines. Now, this has 2 changes in it. The first is that instead of getting 2 victory points for 1 unit in your opponent's deployment zone, you actually get 3 victory points instead now, which is a great bump. And if 1 or more units within your opponent's deployment zone are a troops, armiger, or war dog unit, you also gain that 1 command point in addition to that as well. So Engage on All Fronts has also had a bit of a minor change where they've reduced the distance that you need to be away from another table quarter from being 6 inches to 3 inches now. So it actually makes it a little easier to get across there with your units, so you don't necessarily have to rely on fast units like, say, Raptors in Chaos Space Marines or Bikes, Deathwatch Bikers, Vanguard Vets in Marines, Scarab Swarms in Necrons, things like that would be able to score those for you. So overall, that is all the changes, because Raise the Banners High is the same, and Retrieve Battlefield Data, again, has just changed the name of it to Retrieve Battlefield Data instead of Retrieve Nephilim Data, Retrieve Nuckman Data, Retrieve Data. I still call it Retrieve Data because that's the way it is. But overall, there's been some great changes here. I really do like how things have turned out in terms of the core secondaries. So next up, we're going to be tackling the Imperium secondaries. So we're going to start off with the Adeptus Astartes, and we're going to cover all the changes in terms of the regular Space Marines and the sub-factions for them as well. Now, the first big change is Codex Warfare. Now, this is quite important when you pair this with the Combat Doctrines change as well. Each part of this for the Devastator, Assault, and Tactical Doctrines have each had the limit of 5 victory points for each point removed. So now you can take this, you can sit in Devastator Doctrine as an Iron Hands player for the entire game and score 15 points. Which is insane, because you're just firing heavy weapons all game. It doesn't matter. You're staying in Devastator Doctrine the entire game, so you're eligible to score those points because it is dependent on what doctrine is active. The next change is to Oaths of Moment. Now, the Oath of Duty part of Oaths of Moment has changed to where it is back to being 2 victory points instead of 1 for having an a unit from your army wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield. And shock tactics has remained unchanged from the previous balanced data slate update. Now we get into some of the supplements and their objectives. Now, one big change you'll notice throughout this section is that all of the Space Marine chapters that had more than one secondary, stuff like Blood Angels and Black Templars that are on screen right now, have been reduced to only having one secondary to bring them in line with the other sub-factions that don't necessarily have 9th edition supplements. I'm not a massive fan of the change. I would have loved to have seen the others get just 3 apiece as well, but I can also understand why they wouldn't want to do that. They want to simplify things down a little bit more to stop rules bloat. So it's a bit of give and take here, but with this change, let me know what you think in the comments as well. Now, the Black Templars have lost the bathe your blade in the blood of your foe and allow not the worship of unclean idols secondaries, leaving them with carry out your vows as it was in Nephilim. It has not changed. So that's fine for the Black Templars. They're staying as is with that. In terms of Blood Angels, they have lost the Blade of Sanguinius, Fury of the Lost, and Death from Above. Now, Fury of the Lost is a massive hit to Blood Angels, so is potentially Death from Above. However, they have got Relentless Assault that remains unchanged. Next up, we come to Dark Angels and Death Watch. Now, Dark Angels have lost the Martial Interdiction and Death on the Wind secondaries, leaving them with Stubborn Defiance that remains unchanged. Unfortunately, unless you're taking troops that infiltrate, like Infiltrators or Incursors, then really this one is one you're not seeing as a Dark Angels player. And for my loved Death Watch, we have lost the Long Vigil, Cripple Stronghold, and Suffer Not, the Alien secondary objectives, leaving us with the Cull Order secondary, but it has changed from being 4 victory points for each battlefield role that you destroy to back to 5 victory points for each battlefield role that you destroy, and you actually get to choose all 3 yourself, whereas I believe in the initial codex and maybe in Nachman, and I did forget it in Nephilim, is that it's changed from being you select one, your opponent selects 2, you select 1, whereas now you just select all 3 that you kill. Then, next up, we come to Imperial Fists. They actually remain unchanged for their bolts to barricades. Still actually a really good secondary as well, I think, for Imperial Fist, but they haven't changed it. For Iron Hands, No Mercy, No Respite, Cold Fury. Now, Cold Fury secondary has changed, where the first 2 parts of having a vehicle within 6 inches of the center and within your opponent's deployment zone are no longer wholly within. You just need to be within. Just getting your base in there, just touching it, and you score that point. Really easy to mean that it's a lot more achievable for them. Then we come to the Raven Guard and Salamanders. Now, Raven Guard, their Secure and Sabotage has not changed, so that's as it was in Nephilim. For the Salamanders, the Promethean Creed has changed. So the second part of the objective has now changed from being a maximum of 3 victory points to a maximum of 2 victory points for having a unit on the selected objective as the target of shooting or close combat attacks, but surviving those attacks. So it's only worth 2 instead of 3 now. So not too much value there. It means that, yes, you're only probably going to be able to score at most 5 victory points a turn, maybe 6, but it's still a pretty good secondary for the Salamanders, I will be honest. Then we come to the Space Wolves. Now, these guys have lost Heroic Challenge, Glory Kills, and a Mighty Saga, leaving them with Warrior Pride secondary, which remains unchanged. Ultramarines also remains unchanged with their March for Macragge secondary. And White Scars with Lightning Strike do also remain unchanged there as well. So next up, we come to Adeptus Sororitas. Now, Adeptus Sororitas have seen some changes here. So they have lost the Slay the Heretic secondary objective, and the Defend the Shrine secondary remains unchanged, which is a bit surprising because that's probably one of the ones that we wanted to see change just to help bring down Adeptus Sororitas a little bit. However, there's been some other changes that I'm going to talk about with the other 2. Now, Sacred Grounds has reduced from being 5 victory points to 4 victory points for consecrating an objective outside of your deployment zone. And the biggest change is to a Leap of Faith. Now, a Leap of Faith has been completely rewritten in terms of secondary. It is now the following. At the end of your battle round, you can discard 1 non-cherub miracle dice from your miracle dice pool. you gain a number of victory points depending on the dice that you discard. If you discard a dice of 1 to 3, you get 1 victory point. If you discard a 4 to 5, you get 2 victory points. And if you discard a 6, you get 3 victory points. You can only score a maximum of 12 victory points from this secondary. That is a massive change from what it was previously, where you would just get victory points based on performing acts of faith and you using miracle dice to do so. So I think that will definitely bring down Sisters a lot more than the points changes that we saw. So we'll see what happens with the Sisters win rate. We might see them drop down a little bit past that 55 into like the 52, 53% mark. They're still pretty good. Like, they've still got some good secondaries. I just don't think we're going to see a leap of faith from them as an auto take anymore. Next up, we come to Adeptus Custodes, and there is actually no change at all to any of the Adeptus Custodes secondaries for you, ladies and gentlemen. Then we come to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, they have lost the Uncharted Sequencing secondary objective and had the others changed for what they're keeping. So the Accreditation of Knowledge, the fourth point of it has changed to being a vehicle destroyed that had 8 or more wounds instead of 14 or more wounds. It has also lost the restriction of units destroyed by units other than Adeptus Mechanicus, units not counting towards this secondary. So if you're taking AdMech with Imperial Knights, for example, it can actually work. Next up is the Eradication of Flesh. Now, this one is increased from being 3 victory points to 4 victory points, which is quite nice. So it means if you kill more vehicles than they kill of your vehicles, then, you know, you get 4 victory points, which is quite nice. And then the Hidden Archaeovolt has changed from being scored at the end of the battle round to the end of the Adeptus Mechanicus' turn, and increase the victory points from 4 victory points to 5 victory points. So, some decent changes there for the AdMech, but it'll be really interesting to see how that actually plays out, and hopefully each of these changes will boost up their win rate as well. Next up, we have the changes to the Ashramillitarum. Now, they did lose the Special Order secondary, and the by Lasgun and by Bayonet secondary has remained unchanged. The Boots on the Ground secondary, the only change that it has been made in both parts is it's changed the Regiment Infantry keyword just to being Platoon Infantry keyword now, and it's excluding within 3 inches of the center instead of within 6 inches of the center. In the second part, it's also changed the Regimental Standard to a unit with the Regimental Standard keyword. For Inflexible Command, this objective has changed to the following with its keywords, again changing Ashramillitarum Infantry to Platoon Infantry, Ashramillitarum Vehicle to Squadron keyword, and the third point is that units are to be affected by an order or tank order. And then the other change is that they have changed the Voxcaster to rule to work with the Platoon Vox and the Officer Voxcaster units as well. Then we come to Imperial Knights. Now, Imperial Knights have lost the Jewel of Honor secondary, with the Yield No Ground and Renew the Oath secondary remaining unchanged. Honor of the House has changed slightly to add a caveat that states that it cannot be reduced past 0 victory points at the end of the game if your army is dishonored. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Grey Knights. Now, the Grey Knights secondaries have all changed in some way. The Destroy the Demon secondary has had the part where you need to reduce the victory points you score by 1 for each demon unit still in the battlefield that is not below half strength or not lost half their wounds removed. So it means that you're not going to be losing victory points on this secondary now. Really good take into demons or even chaos that are fielding a fair amount of demon units in their army. The Teleport Assault has increased from 4 victory points to 5 victory points when you achieve that. So again, this one might be a bit more accessible and achievable for Grey Knights now. And then Purifying Ritual, the Warp Charge has changed on this one from being 5 to increasing to being a Warp Charge of 6 now. But that actually covers it for all the changes for the Imperium faction. I like a lot of the changes that we've seen, apart from the reduction in secondaries for a lot of the Adeptus Astartes chapters. But again, it does make sense to reduce some rules bloat. Now, next up, we come to the Forces of Chaos secondary. Now, again, we're looking at the Traitoris Astartes first, with all of the different legions for them as well. Now, the Rise to Glory secondary objective, the initial victory points for this secondary have increased from 2 to 3 victory points, and the second additional victory point scoring option has changed from killing a model with 20 or more wounds to just killing a unit that has the Titanic keyword. So again, some nice changes there as well. I like that it isn't just a unit that's got 20 or more wounds. It's something that has got the Titanic keyword on it. So I think this one's a little better for Chaos Space Marine players now. Next up, we do go into the Long War. This one has changed from being a maximum of 3 victory points per turn to a maximum of 4 victory points per turn. And then for the Dark Gods has remained unchanged. Then we come to some of the legions now. The Alpha Legion secondary for Infiltrate and Subvert. This one has changed from the Subvert action being completed at the end of your next command phase to now being completed at the end of your player turn, meaning it's a lot more easier to access if you've got deep striking units that can survive on that objective and perform that action turn after turn. The next one is the Black Legion with Despoiled Dominions, and this one has changed the Despoiled Dominions action from solely being completed at the start of your next command phase to now, if the action is being performed by a troops unit, it will be completed at the end of your turn, whilst other units still complete at the end of your next command phase. I really like that change, particularly with any actions that mean, okay, just all units have to do it by this and they complete at the start of your next command phase. I like that troops complete at the end of the turn and all other units complete at the start of the next command phase. Next up, we come to Creations of Bile. Now, they have received a balance update change. However, their secondary has not changed at all. However, the Adorn the Canvas Eclectic has changed for the Emperor's Children. So this one's changed significantly. For the 3rd, 2nd, and 4th point, you no longer actually compare with your opponent on each of the different things on whether they were killed during that battle round. Instead, each now are just 1 or more. And the other change is that the victory points, you do not score an additional victory point for getting all 4 parts in the 1 turn. I like that change. It caps it at 4 victory points a turn now, and you're not restricted to being like, oh, I have to kill more than you in a single turn and then not being able to achieve it later on in the game. Next up, we come to Iron Warriors. And Iron Warriors have had the Master of Demolition changed to have an additional victory point for demolishing a demolition site objective marker within 6 inches of your opponent's deployment zone from 3 victory points to 4 victory points, which means that by having the 3, you're able to score 10 victory points on that one. Now, the Light Lord secondary has not changed at all, so that is still the same. And next up, we come to the Red Corsairs, where their Raid and Reeve secondary has also changed from being completed at the start of your next command phase to just being completed at the end of your turn. I really like that change. Again, very similar to some of the other ones we've seen. Next up, the Word Bearers Exalt the Dark Gods secondary has changed from when the Exalt the Dark Gods tally is 1. Instead of scoring 2 victory points, you actually now score 3 victory points, which I think is quite nice on that tally because then it goes 3, 5, 9, 15 instead of 2, 5, 9, 15. It helps a little bit more in the early game. Then we come to the World Eaters secondaries. Now, these are completely new as we are about to see the World Eaters Codex drop within the next month. So they have got 3 secondaries, which are Blood for the Blood God, the Blood God's Due, and Pile of Skulls. So Blood for the Blood God is a Purge the Enemy secondary. At the end of the battle round, provided no World Eaters units from your armies have fallen back this battle round, you score 2 victory points for each enemy character, monster, or vehicle unit that was destroyed by melee attacks made by World Eaters models from your army this battle round, and score 1 victory point for each other enemy unit that was destroyed by melee attacks made by World Eaters models from your army this battle round to a maximum of 4 victory points. So these guys are going to be getting in combat by turn 2 at the latest, by the way this secondary is working. Next up, we have the Blood God's Due in No Mercy, No Respite. At the end of each player turn, score 1 victory point for each objective marker on the battlefield that was drowned in blood that turn. For an objective marker to be drowned in blood, 1 or more units, excluding vehicle units, that started that turn within range of that objective marker must have been destroyed that turn. Doesn't state what faction units, so it could be World Eaters units that died to soak that objective. That's really funny. I love that secondary. It is so corn and so World Eater-esque. I love it. That's a good one. I really like it. So the first 2, awesome. The third one is Battlefield Supremacy Pile the Skulls. Now, at the end of each battle round, before purchasing any Blessings of the Blood God, you can discard 1, 2, or 3 Blood Tithe points. If you do so, score 2 victory points for each Blood Tithe point discarded to a maximum of 5 per battle round. Now, we don't know what Blood Tithe points will be doing. I know there's rumors floating around of what they do from various other creators, so you can find out from them about it. But again, sacrificing an in-game resource, as we've just seen with Sisters of Battle, copying that with a Leap of Faith change, I'm not sure how I feel about that secondary for them. You'll definitely see the first two. You might not see Pile the Skulls. It just depends on how quickly you're able to achieve Blood Tithe points. Next up, we come to the Death Guard. Now, Despoiled Ground and Fleeing Vectors have changed while Spread the Sickness remains unchanged. So, Fleeing Vectors has changed where the first part of it is increased from 1 victory point to 2 victory points for destroying 7 or more models at the end of each player's turn. And Despoiled Ground has changed from points 2 and 3, where you need to be particular distances within table quarters. It's changed from being 6 inches to now 3 inches away from other table quarters. Again, keeping that consistent across the board with table quarter changes. I really like that. Next up, we then come to Thousand Suns. Now, Thousand Suns have lost the Wrath of Magnus secondary, which was absolutely busted into any army that only had a few psychers. And the Sorceress Prowess and Burn the Empires remaining the same, with Mutate Landscape changing its Warp Charge value from being a Warp Charge of 4 to a Warp Charge of 5 to perform the psychic action. Then we come to Chaos Knights. Now, the Chaos Knights lost a fitting challenge secondary objective, with each of their other ones changing. So, Ruthless Tyranny has changed to increase the third part of it from being 1 victory point to 2 victory points. The Storm of Darkness secondary has changed in 2 areas. The first is the aura for -1 leadership to non-chaos units has increased from 6 inches to 9 inches. And the second part is the victory point for completing the Storm the Darkness action has increased from being 3 victory points to 4 victory points, meaning that you only need to perform it for 4 times instead of 5. Then the Path of Destruction secondary, this one has had some significant changes. First off, it has changed from being a maximum of 3 victory points to a maximum of 4 victory points per battle round. Secondly, it is that units just need to be killed in no man's land instead of being 3 inches away from either player's deployment zone. And thirdly, you get an extra victory point for succeeding all 3 other parts of the secondary, meaning getting to that maximum of 4. Again, I like that change as well. There's a conditional victory point, but all 3 you can get throughout the game. So then we come to Chaos Demons. Now, each of these has changed in some way. The Reality Rebels secondary has tweaked the wording from mentioning Chaos Demons, excluding Heretic Astartes, to now just mentioning Legionis Daemonica keyword units. It's the same change on Nourished by Terror as well. And then Despoilers of Reality has had tweaks. They've had the wording change for Legionis Daemonica infantry instead of just what the other 2 had previously. And after completing this action, you roll a d6. You get +1 on that dice result if your unit has icon or instrument keyword, and on a 6+, you gain a Warp Storm point. I think that's really nice. I think that's fluffy, and it means that if you're doing that action and you do it with an icon or instrument unit, you can get a Warp Charge point. I reckon that's pretty cool. Another in-game resource that you're gaining from a secondary, so I like that. But overall, I do like a lot of the changes to the Chaos secondaries that we've seen. But last but not least, we're going to be jumping into the Xenos secondaries, ladies and gentlemen. And first off, I'll be looking at the Asciani. Now, they have lost the Hidden Path secondary, whilst Wrath of Cain, Scout the Enemy, and Scry Futures remain unchanged for them. Alrighty, so not much has changed. Actually, nothing at all has changed for the Asciani. So we're going to move on to Drukhari. Now, Drukhari have lost Beasts for the Arena. However, the Take Them Alive, Fear and Terror, and Herd the Prey secondaries remain unchanged. So again, no changes here outside of the loss of one of the secondaries for the Drukhari. Next up, we come to the Harlequins. Now, they have seen some changes to each of their secondaries. First up, with Take Your Places, this secondary has changed where the Take Your Place objective markers from 1 inch to 3 inches away from any other objective marker, which means you can't put it near main battlefield objectives as well. Bear that in mind. A Deadly Performance has changed from being a Harlequin unit to a Harlequin core unit that is wholly within your opponent's deployment zone, so you've got to make sure that the unit that is doing it has got core. I think only a couple of units have got it, and nothing of the vehicles or the bikes have got it. So it means it's going to be up to the troops to getting in there and doing it. And then the Weave the Veil secondary has changed the psychic action from being a warp charge of 3 to a warp charge of 4. Then we come to the Tyranids. Now the Tyranids Spawn Known secondary has remained unchanged, with the other two seeing some changes. So Synaptic Insight has changed the synaptic kill point tally from scoring 3 victory points has gone up to 5 from being at 4. So it means that you need to kill a lot more with your Tyranids to be able to get those 3 victory points from this secondary. And again, you still only score a maximum of 12 from it. Now, Cranial Feasting has had the additional bonus to the D6 for gaining command point reduced from 2 to 1 if the Hive Tendril model has the Feeder Tendrils keyword. And that's it for Tyranids, but they've already seen so many changes in points with some adjustments in the balanced data slate as well. So I'm not sure how much we're going to start seeing these secondaries being played, or if they're going to go to a bit more generic ones for their armies. Just really depends on the army builds that come out of all of these changes. Next up, we come to Genestealer Cults. Now, the Brood Swarm secondary remains unchanged, whilst the Ambush secondary has changed from being 1 victory point to increasing to 2 victory points for killing 1 or more enemy units with a crossfire marker, with the secondary maximum also increasing to 5 victory points per turn from 4. And then the Sabotage critical location has changed. The points awarded depending on the turn that the action is completed. So if you do it during turn 2, it's increased from 9 to 10 victory points. If it's during turn 3, you score 8 instead of 7. If it's turn 4, you score 7 instead of 6. And if it's turn 5, you score 6 instead of 4. I really like that increase. It means that you can get 1 done turn 3, 1 done turn 4, and still max out this secondary. Then we come to Necrons. Now, Necrons have lost the Code of Combat secondary, with the rest seeing some changes. So Ancient Machineries has changed to the unit that is eligible to complete the Awaken Ancient Machineries action has changed from Necron Core and Canoptic units to being Necron Core Infantry, Biker, and Necron Canoptic units, which means vehicles are no longer able to do it, stopping some of the shenanigans that they are able to do with that. Purge the Vermin has changed to where you can no longer score it during the first battle round. So it means that for this one, you're going to have to really push to score 3 points per turn and at least try and get 4 points on at least 1, if not 2 turns. But that's really hard to do. If you can keep them in your opponent's deployment zone and keep them in there for at least 2 turns, you'll get the 4 points, and then you'll get 3 on the other 2, giving you 14. But this secondary is going to be really hard to max now. And then Treasures of the Aeons has changed the scoring table for the number of victory points you score for holding 3 objectives from 5 to 4 victory points. So it means you've got to hold that for 4 turns instead of 3. So some nice changes to go along with the points changes and the balanced data slate changes for the Necrons as well. So next up, we come to Orcs, and the Orcs have lost the biggest and the best secondary, whilst the Stomp 'em Good secondary has remained unchanged. The Green Tide secondary has changed the distance you need to be away from other table quarters down from 6 inches to 3 inches to be in line with a lot of other secondaries. As well as Get to Good Bits, this secondary has increased from being 3 victory points to 4 victory points per completed action, as well as being a maximum of 6 victory points instead of a maximum of 5 victory points again. So I think this secondary is going to be a lot more viable going into Arks of Omen as well. Next up, we have got the Tau Empire, and the Tau Empire have seen no changes at all to any of their secondaries. So they've already been hit in points. Why change the secondaries to make them a bit worse? I still think they're pretty good for when you can get them. You've just got to be very careful in your army building in terms of how you can achieve them. And then we come to the Leagues of Votann. So the Leagues of Votann has actually lost the Grudge Max secondary, with the Ancestors of Watching, Late Claim, and Prospectors of Wealth secondaries remaining completely unchanged from the Codex's release. It's just good to have them all in the one place like everyone else, so you're not having to ask a League of Votann player, can I have a look at your secondary in your Codex? You've now got it in your Arks of Omen book as well. So that wraps us up for the changes for the secondaries. So we're going to jump, ladies and gentlemen, straight into looking at the mission changes for your 2,000 point competitive games in the mission packet, which there are a few changes, but nothing too major. So first up, we've got Recover the Relics. In terms of this mission, nothing has changed. Next up, We go to tear down their icons. Again, nothing has changed on this secondary either. Still the same deployment, same with the first one as well. Data Scry Salvage. Again, this one has not changed at all with the same deployment as it has been previously. I would have really liked to have seen them triangulate the position of these secondaries rather than just telling you draw a line from corner to corner. I think there's probably some mathematical genius out there that could potentially figure it out, but it would take a heck of a lot of math to do it. Even I'm looking at that going, that would require a heck of a lot of mathematics. So next up, we come to Abandoned Sanctuaries. So there have been some changes to this secondary. So the second part of the primary, where you score it every battle round just here, has changed. That it's added if you satisfy one of the following points, you score 2 victory points. If you satisfy both, you get 3. You control the objective marker in the center of the battlefield, and you destroy at least one enemy unit within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield as well. You can get 2 for doing one of those, or 3 for doing both. And that is the only change that has happened to Abandoned Sanctuaries, ladies and gentlemen. Alrighty, now the conversion mission for mission number 22 has slightly changed. The leading from the front mission rule has changed slightly to where if your warlord is not on the battlefield or embarked in a transport at the start of each player's command phase on a dice roll of a 1 to 3, you don't get your Battleforge CP. Previously, it was you just didn't get it. So I really like this change that they've gone and changed it so it's a 4-up chance that you get your command point rather than just saying you don't get it at all. Next up, we come to mission number 23, the Scouring, and this one has seen no changes at all. Following that, we come to mission number 31, which is Tide of Conviction. Now, Tide of Conviction has changed the supply lines, very similar to what the change is in Conversion. So if you do not control your home objective, so the objective in your deployment zone, during each player's command phase, you roll a d6 on a 1 to 3, you don't get your Battleforge CP. So you're still incentivized to defend your deployment zone, but it's not as much of a hindrance there. And that brings about all of the changes to the missions, because Death and Zeal has not changed from Nephilim, and neither has Secure the Missing Artifacts, ladies and gentlemen. Still the same deployments for all of those as well. So the rest of them remain unchanged from the Nephilim GT mission pack. And that's it. That is all the changes that we see going from the Nephilim GT pack into the Arks of Omen GP pack for the first season of 2023, ladies and gentlemen. Alrighty, everyone. Well, I hope that you did enjoy this look at the Arks of Omen GT mission pack, as well as adding in that FAQ that was just released overnight, bringing in that change to some of the Supreme Commanders as well as Drakari at the time of recording. Now, if you did enjoy this video, ladies and gentlemen, feel free to hit that like button. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to the channel and turn on that notification bell if you want to catch more of my content, as I am attempting to release 2 videos each week here on the channel so that you guys have got consistent content, whether that's battle reports, competitive focus videos for the new guy stuff. Whole bunch of stuff is going to be coming out on the channel going forward as well, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really excited to share with some stuff I'm working on. Now, if you do want to interact with me live, feel free to come and find me where I'm live over on Twitch on Tuesday mornings and Friday evenings consistently, or on Saturdays where I do stream tournaments from time to time, as well as my own hobby sessions as well outside of the weekdays. And we can have a discussion about the Arks of Omen GT pack, some of the changes that impact your faction, how you want to go about playing it, things like that as well. We can jump into a deeper discussion during the stream. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.